So when Elden Ring was released, a streamer friend of mine was arguing with me on how Elden Ring is a superior game, and his argument was that because it doesn't need a HUD to guide you to the objective. But then he started to diss The Witcher 3 because you need the HUD in it. I thought that shit was dumb. So, I'm gonna start by making his argument for him first, explaining how Elden Ring is a superior game to the likes of Witcher 3 and the other open world RPGs. I'm gonna get heat for this on my first video. Anyway, he was talking to me about how the open world in Elden Ring is designed in a way that lets you explore it without a HUD required because of how it seamlessly points you towards your next objective or checkpoint, aka bonfire, aka sculptor's idol. Sites of Grace. They're called Sites of Grace. Anyway, he was also talking about level design, color grading, use of lights, visual cues, and enemy positions, and how they can all guide you towards where your next boss fight is or your next story element, which I thought was a good argument, but then I told him, why don't you just turn off the HUD in Witcher 3? Now, I really did think it was a good argument because it actually got me to play Elden Ring. I wanted to see what the fuck this guy was talking about. Now, in all honesty, I didn't play Elden Ring a lot, but I thought, damn, that was good stuff. He was right about how the level design in Elden Ring naturally guides you through the game, and admittedly, Witcher 3's level design isn't nearly as good as Elden Ring's. Now, the argument that I was making was that a game doesn't specifically need to resort to level design to lead you to an objective. And hey, I know that no HUD is immersive and all. I'm talking to you, Skyrim boys, but come on. The guy was talking about HUD like it was a bad thing. You still have to open the map to know where you're going, and there is also a compass in Elden Ring. But even the dialogue in a game like Skyrim leads you to your objective without using anything but the dialogue, and so does in The Witcher. And especially in The Witcher 3, the dialogue is better than any other game, to the point that you can make a podcast out of the voice lines alone.
Entramos en zona spoiler. Repito, zona spoiler.
Not many people criticize The Witcher 3 well, and they're mostly good critiques, but they failed to mention the bad things about this game. And as much as I love The Witcher 3, I'm not sitting here after 7 years and 5 playthroughs to sing the same praises everyone has been singing. For example, one of the most annoying thing about most open world games, I finna make another video on them suckers, know what I'm saying? Is that they always have fetch quests, and fetch quests in The Witcher 3 are a main part of finding Ciri. You go to the Bloody Baron, he gives you 3 fetch quests. You go to Kira Mitz, she gives you a couple. The main quest is a fetch quest. The Emperor of Nilfgaard wants you to fetch Ciri for him. Granted, that's not the ending most people go for. If you went for this ending, you're a heartless piece of shit.
We bring Dandelion a nice fat perch and he just might forget about the rabbit stew. He could use a bit of exertion.
Huh.
Ice shouldn't be too thick here.
But it's the main quest, and it's what lets Geralt know that Ciri is around to begin with, and it's a fetch quest filled with fetch quests. The main quest isn't nearly the best thing about The Witcher 3, and the pacing in the main story is very jarring and unimmersive. Also, the game on release had a lot of technical issues, and most of them were fixed, but still has some glitches here and there. The minimap is very confusing when navigating inside cities, and the character progression seems more limiting than it is a balancing decision. Also, a bigger issue than most people talk about is entry level, or how seamlessly a game can integrate a player into it. All From Software games and The Witcher 3 suffer from this issue in different ways, of course. In the example of The Witcher 3, you open the game for the first time, go through a 1-hour long tutorial that leads you to some fetch quests, and then the game releases you into the wild where you can do the actual fun stuff. That's very uninviting for many gamers, especially these days with all the short attention spans. Now for The Witcher 3, once you continue about an hour further, oh, is the game so good. All those negative things will amount to 1 point out of its rating, and that's not bad at all. Most of the games we get these days are barely above average or even below average, but most critics give them 7s and 8s. I think the best thing The Witcher 3 does, which is something that all really good games do, is that it's one of the most immersive open world RPGs released within the last 10 years or so. There's a lot to be said on what makes a game immersive, but in the case of this game, the immersion comes mainly from how the gameplay mechanics are integrated with the narrative of each mission. That is very obvious when you let the main quest line alone for a bit and do the Witcher contracts. You're playing the Witcher after all, and somehow that's what makes this game the best in its series. We've seen some of these mechanics in many games before, and I wouldn't call them necessarily creative, but they are innovative in how it uses them and it doesn't annoy you with their uses. It makes sure that the information you get from the dialogue and the hints you get from the investigations accompany your fighting skills and the tools you're given to complete your objective in the correct way, which in turn leads you to get more dialogue choices, and in the end it makes sure to show you the results of your choices, which is how it immerses you by telling you that your actions do have consequences on the world around you. Another thing that is worth mentioning is how the developers have taken care of this game for the 5 years after its release. They have fixed many of the bugs and glitches that were in this game, and they have also released free DLCs, and the biggest one of them that I think is worth mentioning are the releases of Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone expansions. To give some context, these expansions alone are almost the same size as the original game. They come with their own stories, missions, items, and soundtrack, and a lot more than that. And to top it off, they're cheaper than the original price of the game. They didn't seem to have a very extortionate business model as many of the other companies do these days, at least at the time, and I would go so far as to say that with the standards of the industry these days, this game is worth more than $90 for the entirety of the content they released for it from the release date to this day. But let's talk about Elden Ring for a minute here. I always try to give an objective opinion on games even if they're not my cup of tea, and the reason I didn't play Elden Ring that much is because of how much of a steep learning curve it has, and that's not the most fun thing for me to do except if it's a fast-paced game like Sekiro. Sekiro is one of those games where I was reluctant to play at first because of my experience with previous From Software titles, but once the combat clicked for me, I was very satisfied with each and every encounter I went through, and the same thing can be said for Elden Ring. And although the game has a lot of similarities with Dark Souls, it definitely runs smoother in terms of performance, pacing, and animations. However, the sluggish nature of Dark Souls still has a print here for some reason. I suppose they didn't wish to alienate their fans like they did with Sekiro. I guess one of the main points to be made here is that this game does reward you for exploration, and that's complemented by its astonishing level design and thematic choices. The formula they started building on with Dark Souls lends itself naturally to the multitude of class choices and hybrid building freedom that is given in this game, which is a bit confusing if you're not sure what does what, and I'd have to say that this design choice carries a few flaws with it. Because while it gives the player a lot of freedom and excitement, it also confuses the player and makes them feel a bit lost in the slew of ambiguous information that they have to use as guidance, since the game doesn't use HUD that much and doesn't lend you any helping hands. Most players search for guides for builds among many other things to be able to play the game in a relatively satisfying way, and while it might be confusing to design a game in such a way, I also find it alluring. I think it greatly enhances the mystery element, and it also encourages exploration. If you can't go to this area because your kit doesn't work or because you're getting your ass handed to you, you can go to another area. I gave up at Caelid, by the way. Caelid is one of those areas when you enter it, you get that menacing atmosphere. The music, the shapes of the land, the reddish color of the trees and sky, the broken buildings. It all gives you a blood-filled melancholic sense that fills you with despair upon entry, and it puts you on edge of what's to come. I'm not even sure if I didn't want to continue because it was scary or because the weird enemy types in it killed me a bazillion times, but hell was it visceral and real. Every part of the gigantic lands in between, that's a stupid ass name, but whatever. Every part of it is unique in every way, whether it's enemy type, loot, theme, or whichever part it takes in your Tarnished's journey. It doesn't repeat itself much, and it definitely doesn't bore you, and it will put you to your knees if you let it.
I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
Each area has its unique bosses. Even if the game sometimes reuses those assets, it makes sure that it has something different about it each time. Even if it's just the theme of the area, it will feel different because of what you went through to get to it. One of the best things about From Software games is that each enemy type will require from the player to approach it differently. Whether you need a certain item, or you need to dodge in a certain way, or you have to attack with a specific time pattern, it will require you to go through a long process of trial and error to be able to get a very satisfying ending to your fight. And it works with every enemy, and I think that The Witcher 3 also shares this with Elden Ring. These developers took a lot of risky decisions throughout their careers, and I respect them for it. Each game they released had a unique take, especially Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring. With Elden Ring, the riskiest decision was how to approach the open world mechanic in a unique way, and I think they managed to achieve that and a lot more. They are proving to the video game industry that a game can have a vast amount of content at release without bugs, no loot boxes, and still cost $60 at release. I do hope that they continue to release unique games that have a load of content only for $60 at release, and I hope that these games are fun. Fun is the most important thing. It keeps you immersed and engaged, and that's the taste that'll be left in your mouth after you play any of these games I mentioned here, and any games that you've played and still have a fond memory of.